I touched down in Romania with my best friend Ronnie, who'd organized and paid for the whole trip. Ronnie had accumulated a huge wealth over the years, and he was a real adrenaline junkie, which I was as well, but not to the same extent. He kept telling me that this was going to be like nothing we'd ever done before, and he couldn't believe it was even real. There was a car waiting for us at the airport, and we were driven about 3.5 hours away, to a small village not far from the Hungarian border. The place we stayed in overnight was basic, but fine for this kind of trip, and we were met at 3 p.m. the next day by some men that looked as if they'd lived through a lot. They drove us out to a snow-covered valley where we stopped and were led to a large steel cage that was well anchored into the ground. Ronnie looked excited and got inside, ushering me to follow him. The men kept looking up at the sky and muttering to each other. Then one of them handed us each a large bottle of water, telling us to only use it if necessary. They also said to stay in the very center of the cage, and then the heavy door was locked. They said they'd be back at sunrise to pick us up. One of the men poured something around the cage, which looked and smelled a lot like blood. I asked Ronnie what was going on, and he said to wait, and to remember that we were safe. It got dark quickly, and we heard the first of them soon afterwards. It started as a faint laughter, coming from the woods, and something swooshed over the cage, giggling. I shouted at Ronnie what was going on, and he yelled that this was the greatest thing that we'd ever see. One of them stepped out of the woods and seemed to be by the cage in seconds. It was very dreamlike, and I saw a glimpse of the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Then she was gone. Ronnie told me that one of his CEOs had done this, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I shouted that he was crazy, and he said that they couldn't get in, and we each had holy water, just in case. I tried to calm myself, but they kept passing overhead, and it was hypnotizing to watch them. At one point, one landed a few feet away from the front of the cage and smiled at us, then walked forward and kneeled down. Ronnie said hello to her and waved, and she beckoned him forward, but he shook his head, savvy to their ways, and her face changed in a split second, hissing, and she reached into the cage, but we were safely in the middle, and she flew off. There was about 4 of them, and they didn't give up trying to get at us. It was only at early dawn did they disappear, and I have never been so glad to see the sun come up. The men arrived promptly and joked that we were still in one piece. Then we were taken back to the accommodation, where we had breakfast, slept, and then drank Romanian beer and discussed our encounter with real-life vampires. I moved into a new apartment because it was cheap, and I was tired of couch surfing. It wasn't the nicest place. The walls were stained, the stairwell smelled like old cigarettes, and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves, but at least it was mine. It was on the rough side of town, but I figured I could handle it. I worked late nights at a warehouse which was 6 blocks away, and by the time I'd get home, I was too tired to care about anything but sleep. It was within the first week when I was woken by the banging. I initially thought it was just some drunk, or maybe someone mistaking my door for someone else's. It was a loud and urgent thudding that echoed down the hall. I didn't open the door, I didn't even look through the peephole, I just lay in bed with my heart pounding, telling myself it was nothing. But it didn't just happen once, it happened the next night, and the night after that. It was always at the same time, the same loud, deliberate banging. There were never any voices, or any footsteps coming or going. I tried to shake it off. I even joked with the guy at the gas station across the street about how I had my own ghost. He laughed, but there was something weird in his face. He didn't ask questions, he just changed the subject. After a week of no sleep, I bought one of those cheap knockoff Ring doorbells and installed it outside. I wanted proof, or at least some kind of reassurance that it was just a bored junkie or some kind of weird neighbor game. I hooked it up to my phone, tested it, and waited. That night, the banging came again, right at 1:04 a.m. I froze in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of those knocks. When it was over, I reached for my phone with shaking hands. My heart was thumping in my chest, louder than the knocks had been. I opened the app. The video started a few seconds before the knock. The hallway was empty, just the usual dim lighting and stained carpet. Then slowly, a figure stepped into view. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was tall, but his limbs were too long, like they had been stretched. His skin was pale and thin, almost gray under the flickering light. He wore what looked like an old coat, and his face just didn't look right. He raised one arm and knocked, then he leaned in toward the camera, but not in a curious way, more like he knew I was there. The video froze for a second, glitched, then resumed, but the hallway was empty again. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't since. I tried showing the footage to someone, but they thought it was just a prank. Every night, the banging still comes. I don't answer, and I don't watch anymore, but I know he's out there. We moved to the farm just before planting season. It had sat quiet for months, tucked between two tree-covered hills, and it was the kind of place that made you feel small under all that open sky. The house needed work, but it had charm. My wife Claire found it peaceful, and my 8-year-old son, Dennis, spent the first week chasing frogs in the creek. The only thing we didn't like was that out in the far field, there was a scarecrow. We didn't think much of it at first, but the more you saw it, you just felt like there was something off about it. Birds perched on the fence around it, but never on the scarecrow itself. The wind never seemed to touch it, even when the grass bent and the trees leaned, it stood still. Claire mentioned it first. She said it gave her a headache when she looked at it for too long. I didn't say anything, but I'd noticed the same. One morning, I found Dennis staring at it through the upstairs window. He didn't look away when I called him. Eventually, we pulled it down. It was heavier than it looked, and stiff, like the stuffing inside had hardened over the years. I hauled it to the barn, dropped it in a far corner, and covered it with an old tarp. The field looked way better without it, but the next morning, it was back. It was in the same spot, with the same tilt to the head. I checked the barn, the tarp was on the floor. We didn't talk about it, just moved it again, and the same thing happened. It was always back the next day, exactly where it had been, arms out like it hadn't gone anywhere at all. Dennis started waking up tired, and there was mud on his shoes some mornings. Once I found him outside at dawn, standing barefoot at the edge of the field, his eyes unfocused, like he'd just wandered there. There were noises at night too, sometimes tapping on the windows. The lights in the barn flickered if we left them on, and once, the door was wide open in the morning, though I knew I'd locked it. Dennis began drawing the scarecrow, not just in the field, but in the house, by the stairs, and at the foot of his bed, and it was always smiling. One morning, I'd had enough. I grabbed the shotgun, walked straight into the field, and leveled it at that thing. It didn't move or twitch, it just stood there, arms wide and head tilted like it was listening. I fired once and blew its head clean off. The sack burst open, dust and something darker scattered out on the ground. I fired again through the chest. Straw flew all over, and it crumpled into the dirt like nothing more than old clothes and sticks. It never came back after that, but there was something more to that scarecrow than any of us wanted to admit.